Welcome, I'm Rocco McSweets to the first ever episode of The Sweet Spot with your boy, Rocco. Today we're going to be featuring a special guest straight out of Ireland themselves, Jack Moody, coming to the stream. How's it going, Jack?
Doing very well. How are you, Rocco?
I'm doing, man. It's great to see your face. I absolutely love you.
You too. You too. Pleasure to be on the inaugural episode of The Sweet Spot.
Very first one. First one. Can we get a hell yeah?
Hell yeah.
I don't know if it worked, but
It's funny. I remember we were talking last year at the Boulder Taco Fest, and you were talking about this. So almost 12 months later, it's come full circle.
That's me and my buddy Sam, the guy that set all this up. He had invited me to do a podcast with him a while ago, like you said, about 12 months ago. And I just never had the time, or just I don't know. I was second guessing myself, and I don't know. I just something snapped in my head. I was like, let's get this started. I made that post, and overwhelmingly huge responses.
Yeah,
like 64 replies.
Yeah, I got in there early. I was right once I saw it. I dropped you a line, but yeah, I subsequently saw like 2 hours later. Was like, dear Lord, there's a huge amount of interest. So it just speaks to your standing in Colorado wrestling.
Thank you, man. That warms my heart. I do my best to create a open, warm. I come in with a hug every time, you know. I'm a hugger, so everyone they know my vibe. But speaking of vibes, man, you're a vibe yourself, brother. Coming all the way across the pond.
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell us about where you grew up and the wrestling scene over there, especially as a kid, what that was like.
Yeah. So I guess the town Bray, County Wicklow, Ireland is somewhat synonymous with pro wrestling now, given it's Finn Balor's hometown, given that it's JD McDonough's hometown, who just debuted on Raw, and Becky Lynch would have trained there herself. So Bray somehow became this like origin story or origin town for Irish pro wrestling when I believe Finn Balor and a guy called Paul Tracy in the early 2000s set up the kind of an offshoot of the NWA Hammerlock School, which was in the UK. And they basically, I think the pair of them would have been going back and forth to the UK, just to learn. And there was no school in Ireland at the time. So this is like, late 90s, early 2000s. So they set up a school in Bray called NWA Hammerlock Ireland, which subsequently transformed into the Fight Factory, which is still running today. And it's Ireland's longest running pro wrestling school. And that's where I started.
Awesome.
Yeah. So basically September 21. So basically after the pandemic, once things started to like open up in the world, like Ireland was a weird place during the pandemic. Like there was a time when you couldn't go beyond like 2 kilometers of your home for fear of reprimand. So it was a very strange time. So basically I kind of, in that weird 18 months or whatever it was, I kind of concocted a grand scheme to transform my life and change the way I lived, and both in terms of my professional day job, but also wanting to pursue pro wrestling with as much intensity as I could do. So basically Fight Factory Pro Wrestling, formerly NWA Hammerlock Ireland, we're advertising for a 10-week beginner course in September to start in September of 21. And I signed up for that and kind of treated it since then, coming up on 2 years. I've basically treated it like an academic study, and molding my day around physical well-being, my training, my diet, and everything that kind of fuels the wrestling aspirations. So Bray is where I'm from, and that's where the school initially started. Now it's based out of Dublin, so it's a lot more central, which means that the school is growing and expanding rapidly. There's a huge cohort of new trainees constantly coming in the door. I always say Fight Factory is like a conveyor belt of pro wrestling talent, in that it is literally like an assembly line of people coming in. And it's like incredible trainers: Phil Boyd, Justy, LJ Cleary, Martin Steers, Katie Harvey. They're all cornerstones of Irish pro wrestling, and they're there on the regular. So there's no surprise why there's such a good talent conveyor belt emerging.
Yeah, it sounds like I mean, there's a lot of really good promotions across the seas over there, especially now, things like ICW,
Yeah,
where Finn Balor really laid his foundation.
yeah.
He created that whole
Joker,
mystique.
Joker,
Yeah, yeah,
Joker
that
did
was
it.
amazing, wasn't
Yeah,
it? When he came
incredible.
out the clown mask and oh
Yeah,
boy.
that was a wild time. I remember he did the Bane as well. Did you see the Bane?
Yeah, that was insane. Did you
Yeah,
ever get a chance to go to any ICW shows?
sadly, no, no. And
No.
I think that was probably the time to do it. I think it's the garage. I think that's where they work out of. I think that's their venue.
Yeah.
But they've had some massive show. I remember like 2016. I think they did like one of the Wembley arenas and got close to like 10,000 people, which was probably around the time WWE is like, right, we need to like set up a UK base because these promotions are just, I mean, they're making a killing and they're making huge money and they've rabid fan bases. So that was probably like the peak of the UK scene, I would say. Um, and it's obviously changed a lot since. There's, I think, when you have something like WWE UK, although it's now disbanded, that takes a lot of the wind out of some of the promotion sales, in that they can't bring in certain talents, they can't promote certain matches, and so on. So yeah, 2015-16 was probably where things peaked for UK wrestling, but it's still in great health. And the Irish scene,
Yeah.
I know you asked about that. That's also in rude health. Fight Factory do monthly shows that are selling out all the time. High caliber talent performing there on the regular basis. Of course, there's OTT, which is world renowned at this point, and you have a lot of people flocking from all over the world basically to perform in an OTT ring. So somehow Ireland has, for a small island, has become a kind of a hub for wrestling, and yeah, at a very high level, we seem to produce good talents who have something to offer a US audience. And that's
We
what
love you
I'm
guys over here,
trying
man.
to leverage my innate pale skin, Irish look, Irish accent. All of it is marketable somehow. So it definitely helps me stand out.
Yeah, Conor McGregor in the UFC. You got a lot of who was the female fighter? He was just at,
Oh,
I think, the
Katie
Bellator.
Taylor.
Yeah.
She's also from Bray, which I know it's not pro wrestling,
Okay.
but yeah, it's insane when you actually think about the kind of the standout talents that have come from Bray in a variety of fields, not just wrestling, but like boxing too. So yeah, she unfortunately that was a homecoming match she had a few weeks ago, and she McGregor was heavily involved in the promotion for that.
Yeah. He was
Sadly, she lost.
excited for a win.
Yeah, she lost on a decision, which is very, very unfortunate. Because when it's so tight, it can really go either way. But yeah, I'm sure I think there's a rematch scheduled. So
I think I'm thinking of someone else because the one that I'm thinking of won by decision barely, and he was like super excited for her. They were like losing their mind. But that just goes to show how many talents come out of that area in Ireland. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's funny, and I guess there's only going to be more because once you have trailblazers like Devitt, Becky Lynch, McGregor, Katie Taylor, all of these, that inspires a lot of people to do it. I mean, there's so many kids now who do MMA, who would have never even thought about it before.
Never.
So it kind of normalizes these as pursuits. I mean, I think Ireland's very, very traditional to a fault in that, like, there's certain sports you're allowed to be interested in, and if your interests fall beyond, like, outside of those parameters, you're kind of a pariah of sorts. So I think it's great that people will look at a Katie or a Connor or a Finn Balor or a Becky and say, well, there's no reason why I can't do that. Whereas 10 years ago, 20 years ago, for kids growing up, there really wasn't that like beacon of hope that you could point to and say, well, like, they're doing it, so there's nothing stopping me doing it.
So when you were a kid, let's jump to that. When you were a kid, who were the wrestlers that you looked up to that you were like, oh, that's they inspire me to want to, or were you even a wrestling fan as a kid?
Oh, I was a huge wrestling fan. I would say, like, from the time I was like 8, and you actually hear that age a lot when people are asked about their story or how they segued into wrestling, and it's like, for some reason, the age 8 seems to be a common trend. But yeah, I was a kid of the Attitude Era, so obviously lived through the most glorious and fascinating time in wrestling history. I remember just turning it on one time. I think it was on like Sky One, and you're just totally transfixed by it. I think it was like right before Austin broke out, so I got to basically see that the emergence of Austin, and then that run which really like catapulted him to a different level. But I will say, I've said this before in other interviews, but the feud that really like started it for me was very random. Nobody remembers it. Steve Blackman and Jeff Jarrett
Okay.
had this feud in like 1908, I would say. So basically, it was such a simple, basic feud, and like a lot of people, you wouldn't right now if you saw it, you'd think it was very, very average. But for me as a kid, I was so infuriated by the fact that like Jarrett, like because Blackman's a beast, and like
Beast. I
rightfully
love Blackman.
should like mop the floor with someone like Jeff Jarrett, like just based on
Yeah.
skill level and size and so on. But like it was just a very simple story that for weeks Jarrett couldn't, or Blackman couldn't get his hands on Jarrett. Like Jarrett was just somehow evading him constantly, dirty tricks, all the heel tactics in the world. And for me as a kid, it's like this is an outrage. This is so unreasonable. And then of course they have their pay-per-view match, and of course me and my friends have a sleepover, and like they're all looking forward to like the Austin main event, and I'm just like fucking looking at them. Like the main event is Blackman Jarrett for me. Like this is I've been waiting weeks to see it, and I remember that feeling was I couldn't quite fathom that Blackman was able to finally get his hands on him, and it was just like you're a kid, it's like it's magic, and there you're just totally transfixed by the whole spectacle, and I was just literally glued to the screen watching I mean, Blackman's had a very mediocre career, like, but obviously during the Attitude Era, it's very hard for someone who's not like totally magnetic to transcend.
Yeah.
But for me, that was like the initial spark, I would say, and then pretty much never stopped watching. I would say there was like 1 or 2 years where I would have been sporadically checking in. But then it just came back very, very strong, and it was stronger than before, because at that point I had an appreciation for the actual wrestling, and less so the theatrics and the storylines. It was more like good wrestling was really compelling to me.
Yeah, it's funny how that transition happens. There's like a moment there where you're so invested in story and characters, and like for me specifically, when I was a kid, it was hard for me because my dad didn't like wrestling. So when I did get to watch it, he only let me watch the wrestling portion, and he'd be like, "Oh, they're talking," and he would change the channel.
Yeah.
And so any promos, any story, I was oblivious. I was like, "Why is Undertaker fighting Undertaker right now?"
Yeah.
So it was rough for me, but once there became a point for me, like with CZW, ROH, seeing guys like Chris Hero, Eddie Kingston, Mad Dog 20, seeing their skill level and what they were doing, is like, man, these guys are really talented, and I'd learned kind of the work of the magic of the business, and understanding that, knowing what they were doing to put on this show that was so much more spectacular than it should have been, because at the time it was just an independent wrestling promotion. And boy, did they turn those companies into like legends now. You'll never forget them.
Absolutely. I always thought it was so interesting because I was so invested in WWF at the time, like WWE, but the idea that there were these other promotions, it just seemed so alien. You're like, what? Like, but what could they be doing that's better than this? Like, and then you might see a little WCW clip, or then you'd see some ECW, and then you'd see some TNA, and you're like, Jesus, like these are all quite diverse in what they're offering. And for a while, like then like TNA, I became a big TNA fan purely because of the style of wrestling that was like Motor City Machine Guns. When the young bucks were Generation Me.
Oh man,
that was a magic era for TNA. And I remember saying to people, it's like such a shame that like they don't have the audience, that people aren't like seeing this at scale, because it was probably the best work they put on. But it's just and then you figure out, okay, like chain wrestling, that's like something I'm really interested in, and then it's like, okay, let's learn about that. Let's see what different techniques I can pull out of the bag. So it's all like, it's like a stepping stone process towards making this part of your life in a bigger way. And you probably feel the same way, in the sense that you're now commentating regularly, and you got your new podcast. So you've gone on your own journey yourself.
Yeah, wrestling has been a wild journey, I think, for everyone that gets involved, especially if you stay on a positive mindset and you can kind of navigate the toxic sides of things. Because if you can get past that, the ceiling is almost there. There's none. You can go anywhere you'd like in this, and it's beautiful. But so when you were first starting in wrestling, as far as like the companies that you worked for, what was it like that was different in comparison to, because you've pretty much done a lot of work here in the States at this point. So what's the difference between the States and Ireland, UK wrestling?
Yeah, I would say the main difference is, like, if you take your typical Irish show or UK show, and then on the other side, the typical US show, I would say the kind of presentation value is significantly higher here, more often than not, in terms of like your average show, in terms of the lighting and the venue. Like Ireland, there's a limited amount of venues where companies can run wrestling shows. It's like very much like it is here in Denver. Like, it's very, very expensive to rent out facilities for a night. So you're left with the reality whereby there's only a certain amount of venues that you can run, that have they mightn't have the aesthetics that you might get with a Castle Event Center or an Oriental Theater or the Roxy Theater. So that's the big takeaway when I first started coming here we're wrestling in Denver, was all these different cool venues that they all had their unique style. Whereas I think in Ireland and the UK, you have, out of a necessity, you have a lot of like community centers, and that all are, there's nothing wrong with those. It's just like that, it's much brighter. It's there's a lot.
It's a different level. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just less atmospheric. That's just the way it is. Whereas I think here in the US, there's such a diversity of venue, that each show feels unique and different and has its own fan base. And there's people that always go to the Oriental Theater. There's people that always go to the Castle Event Center. There's people that always go to Mile High Comics because they like the venue and they like the show that's put on in that venue. And then to give some credit to the Irish and UK scene, like, I would say the standard of wrestling, like in terms of the technical capabilities of the wrestlers, is probably higher, in the sense that it's just a more common style. Chain wrestling isn't super popular over here. I think that's why you have the likes of Jonathan Gresham in a league of his own, in terms of this type of matches he puts on. Whereas
that's why Zack Sabre, I think, stood out here too.
Yeah,
he was people noticed
so like
him.
It's that style is much more common in the Ireland and in Ireland and the UK. So I would say like your typical match structure will be quite different there too, in terms of like the tempo and the job, the kind of chain sequence at the start. But yeah, I would say the biggest difference here is just that kind of the scale of American wrestling is much bigger, because there's more people and you can have 2 shows a weekend and you're going to sell them out. Whereas in Ireland, there's a significant pool of fans, but they would easily get burnt out if there were weekly shows in the same city or the same venue, Whereas here you can, you look at your screen, you got CWC, Primo, CSW, New Era, sadly, just disbanded. But
yeah, man, that one's sad.
Battleground, and so on. IWC, there's so much.
Which I'll be jumping to next weekend. That'll be interesting.
Oh, cool.
Have you worked for Battleground?
Not yet, but I am planning to be there in August. I did talk
awesome.
to Pete, so I don't know if that's a spoiler or not.
Yeah.
We are in discussions.
Kayfabe.
But very, very excited for that. And yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised if there's another big promotion that emerges in the next few months, just out of sheer demand, because especially like with this podcast, you're going to be giving people a platform to talk about what they're doing, and that just generates more interest and more fans. So hope the Colorado wrestling scene is in very good health. It's probably a hidden gem of the US scene, I would say. I think Colorado is ridiculously considered a flyover state by some people in Europe who only focus on the East Coast or the West Coast, whereas for me, Colorado is far superior in terms of quality of life and standard of living and just the people and the weather, everything, like compared to like a New York or a California. So I think you're going to see more and more top talents coming through here, working for the likes of Triple L. You know, they're getting such great talent in monthly.
Devotion out in Utah.
Devotion, yeah, I was very fortunate. I went there last August, which was a hell of a trip. I really enjoyed it. That was Salt Lake City. And then the very next night we had the Primo show in the Roxy. So that was a great weekend.
Hell yeah. It's always fun, man. We always have a really good time. I know that, I mean, with anything in the world, things can get a little weird sometimes, but for the most part, I'd say we're 95% all positive. Everyone's super happy to see each other. The locker rooms are always embracing. There's no like cliques or weird.
Yeah.
You know, I think like a lot of that's been pushed out. So it's been pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak to any of that purely because I've only really been here or been involved since last summer. But yeah, the openness is incredible when you think about like someone like me who, you know, trains a couple of times with the butcher shop crew and then gets an opportunity to be on a Primo show and then gets an opportunity to be on a CSW show and then go to Devotion in Utah and work New Era and all of these things. It's like that shouldn't be possible realistic. Like in Ireland, that wouldn't happen, I don't think. Irish people are very, very suspect of new people and broadening their friend circle. A lot of my Irish friends will be giving me shit for saying this, but it's totally true. Whereas in America, I think there is because it's quite transient and people do move around a lot and move city.
Yeah.
People are more open to making new connections and bringing people into their ecosystem. And I've experienced that both in wrestling sense, but also just in terms of personal life here. Because I've been coming back and forth for quite some time. I've got a lot of friends here, so I've experienced how easy it is to kind of integrate into society here. Whereas in Ireland, you'd be kind of cast off. Sadly, it's true.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. How long have you been in the States for this trip?
Couple since well, obviously I went to WrestleMania, so that would have been at the beginning of the trip. So that was obviously great, and we got to train. So seeing me and some of my friends who trained together in Fight Factory in Dublin went to Mania together, and we also got to train with Chavo. There was a Chavo Guerrero seminar on in Burbank, California, which is about a 40-minute drive from LA, depending on the traffic, of course. So yeah, that was an amazing experience for all of us, really, because you know these seminars, it's you're just kind of absorbing, trying to absorb as much info and insights as possible. And he was really, really great and very thorough and like very generous with his time. So shout out to Chavo.
Yeah, he seems like a pretty genuine dude. Grew up loving him. I absolutely loved everything he's done, including even like the Kerwin White stuff. I thought was hilarious. You know, he was a funny dude.
You kind of forget that was him. And it was so short lived. It was like a summer, maybe a summer.
The golfing skits is just so ridiculous.
It's just, and Dolph Ziggler was his caddy. Yeah, madness, really.
Completely.
Yeah, just another example of something that you just couldn't do now, nor would you like to see it.
No, but boy, what a time! Like it was, and he was just so willing. He was just open and like, well, this is what we're doing now.
Yeah.
We're here.
So open, and I got the impression from talking to him that he was very much a company man and not like a prima donna at all. Just been like, he'll make whatever they give him, he'll make it work. Probably definitely an unsung hero in the sense of like quality of matches, selling, promo ability, you know, just character, agility, I would say, in terms of being able to flip-flop between different roles. I don't know if he's still active or if he's still like performing regular. I don't think he is, but like it would be great to see him do one final run.
We could get him back out here at IWC versus Jack Moody, right?
Oh,
there we go. That's
yeah.
I'll get Joey's ear.
Yeah. Oh, please. I would say if there were like a dream opponent, not to segue out of this, but would be definitely
No,
Chris
yeah.
Sabin. So if there's any way Chris Sabin can be enticed to come to
Hail Saban, baby.
the Mile High City.
Oh man, he was fun to watch. And then the Motor City Machine Guns, I
Mm,
absolutely loved them. I was a
yeah,
huge Alex Shelley fan growing up.
yeah.
Loved Alex
Um,
Shelley. Just
the
the
amount,
look, he had such a cool look. He
yeah,
just
yeah. The amount of video clips I have on my phone of just Chris Sabin or Alex Shelley chain sequences. It's that's basically how I try to learn. If there's something I see in a match that I want to learn myself, I'll just record it, and then when I go to train, I'll basically try and take one or two of the guys and just say like, well, let's try and figure this out, how they did this sequence, and then just like practice, do like 10 reps of it, and then suddenly you can do it. So a lot of Saban stuff is iconic in the sense that he was such a trailblazer for that style, and still is.
oh
Like he's
yeah.
still performing for Impact at a very high level.
Yeah, definitely going back to what you just kind of mentioned, it's funny how a lot of people like Max Holloway, for instance, learned MMA off of video games or watching footage, not really having the training. He might have had like a base, there might be a base there, need to know how to roll or at least back bump. You definitely need to know your bumps. But from there, boy, you can kind of just start watching stuff and developing off that.
Yeah,
Obviously, you can't just go in and say, you know what, I'm gonna try a dominator on you real quick and spike somebody, but
yeah,
it's amazing the learning process from just watching, uh, just having a little bit of training is
yeah, yeah.
amazing.
And I would also be an advocate for like solo training when you can. Like this is unbeknownst to most people, but like when I'm staying here very close to the butcher shop, so I'll be like, going over there as much as I can just to do reps, to get all the rolls, all like practice my springboards, all of that stuff that you can't really when you're in a training group with like 10, 12 people, like you get your turn and then you're at back of the line, and that's a great way to learn as well, like in a
Mhm.
group setting. So I wouldn't discount that at all. But in terms of like
No.
getting repetitions in of particular movements and getting familiar with like how the ropes feel and like getting your like improving your balance on the ropes, improving how you move and videoing yourself and kind of going back on that content and seeing is there any way you can improve it. I think that's could give you a huge advantage if you have the ability to do that, but obviously not everyone has. And it's just a case of getting in the reps as often as you can.
Yeah, a lot of these Colorado wrestlers don't understand, the privilege they have of having a place like Butcher Shop or Empower where they can just show up at any time. As long as you have your fees paid, you can show up at any time, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 2 in the afternoon, noon, whenever you want, and do some solo training and really work on your craft.
Yeah, yeah. So I've been very fortunate. It just keeps you sharp and keeps you in ring shape, because ring shape is totally
Yep.
different than regular cardio. You just like I think you can't really create the same environment outside the ring in terms of just the frequency of pivoting and moving your body and jumping over the ropes and not being gassed, because that's always the fear. There's been a couple of times where I've been flying from sea level to Mile High, and then you'd have a show the next day or that day, and you're like, God, like this could be disaster in the sense that I haven't acclimated. But I think as long as your conditioning is good and you're able to maintain your composure out there and breathe and not be easily rattled, you're going to be fine.
I'm gonna hurt all my Nuggets fans out there, but the Heat definitely acclimated to the
Oh, they
altitude out
did.
here.
They did. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I was upset. I even made a post. No one talk to me till next Wednesday when they play. I'm done.
Yeah. The Heat came out hot, no pun intended, but like at the start of the match was it Sunday?
Yeah.
But I guess it makes it more interesting. I think, I've been kind of getting more indoctrinated into the NBA since I've been here, because NBA isn't that big in Ireland at all.
Yeah.
So it's much like last year with the Stanley Cup. Like I wouldn't have been into ice hockey that much, but like when and the local teams involved in the playoffs and so on. You kind of want to you want to get involved. You want to be invested somewhat.
Yeah. I mean, brother, I appreciate you coming on here and the first inaugural show.
Yeah, enjoy.
I did want to ask though, you recently suffered an injury. How's that going? How's rehab going? You doing good?
Doing fine, yeah, doing very well actually. It was really just a couple of days in a sling, and yeah, with a few days of just icing it and taking care of it, I was back in the gym, and I have a good PT here, physical therapist, who kind of put me on the right track in terms of rehab. And when it comes to rehab, I'm a real like nerd in that like I'll basically do all like I want extra homework. I'll be like, oh, is there anything else I could do that would expedite my recovery? So I really embrace the recovery process and think like do the sauna every day. I like ice it every day. I'm basically doing everything I can to increase my mobility and improve my physical condition. But it's funny when I was in the sling, I was looking at videos of Finn Balor from 2017 or I believe 2016 or 17 when he sustained his injury, which was obviously way worse. But like it was just because I know I was dejected. Like you never want to get hurt, but like
No.
listening to how he was feeling at the time because he had a full tear of his labrum, I believe, and a variety of other ailments in his shoulder. So it kind of helped put it. And then he was looking at like 9 months or something out of action, and he's just won the Universal title. So it helped put it in perspective for me that I was probably going to be a couple of weeks out, and that proved to be true. I guess the rehab worked, and the sauna helps, and getting lots of sleep and staying hydrated, and all of these things.
Yeah.
These are all the little victories that you can that can help you, accelerate your recovery.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear that your shoulder's back in action, man.
Yeah.
I do have a question in the chat here, and they're wondering when Ireland is going to start doing deathmatch.
When death matches are going to be in Ireland, or when me all do
Yeah. Yeah, no. Well, both now since you
uh-huh.
brought it up. I mean, that's on you.
I don't know. I don't think there's ever been a death match in Ireland. I can't back that up with data, but I'm pretty sure there hasn't been. There's not really a market for like super hardcore wrestling back home. OTT have had their fair share, like bloodbath spectacle matches, but it's pretty uncommon. And I don't know what promotion would actually see. I'm not sure it would. Maybe it would sell if the fact that there hasn't been any. And I guess if the feud merited it, it might work. But I think I guess I just couldn't see Ireland having a slave to the deathmatch annual tradition, for example, which is here. I just couldn't see that playing out. We're a very cautious bunch of people, us Irish. Like we are, I would say, risk averse. Like we have this risk averse cultural DNA where we just kind of, try to keep our head down. So I don't see any promoter willingly putting on a death match. As for me performing in one, I would say unlikely. But you never know. You never know.
You never know.
I guess
Joe McDougal can be persuasive.
I know. Yeah. I think last year's one I was out of town for that. But I mean, it's an awesome spectacle, and it's an art in itself. It's probably an underappreciated form of wrestling, but like my interest very much lies on the other end of the spectrum, which is technical grappling, chain, submission, evasive techniques. But who knows? Wrestling is a funny business, and
boy,
death matches are a thing.
Will you be here in September? Because you'd mentioned August, so I don't know.
Yeah, so there's a. I don't know if I'll be back in September. I am hoping to also go to All In London, in Wembley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that will likely keep me in and around Ireland and the in and around Ireland and the UK for Around the September. Is that when it's on? Is that when Deathmatch is on?
Yeah, September is when Slave hits every
Okay.
September.
Yeah. Yeah. No
I think it's the
plans currently.
13th and 14th. I'm not
Mhm.
sure, but
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. No plans currently to be here for
yeah.
that, but things change and travel plans change. But yeah, it is. Maybe for some people, it's probably like a bucket list thing. They want to have a death match. Whereas for me, it's not really on the list. It's more like, if it makes sense or if I'm feeling up to it. But I'll likely just stick to the chain.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
unfortunately started my commentary career watching deathmatch in AWR out in Indianapolis, and
Mhm.
that scarred me for life, pun intended.
Okay.
Yeah. But you mentioned, deathmatch not really your thing. You're more into chain wrestling. Who got you into chain wrestling? Are you like a fan of like Johnny Saint or
I think it was really, I guess, so like watching wrestling, like the Motor City Machine Guns would
yeah?
have been a big influence. I would have watched a lot of the best of the Super Juniors in 2000,
Mm,
and like from 2007 on, and I'd retrospectively watch a lot of those matches even now. And a lot of those matches would have been, heavy chain, a lot of like Prince Devitt, Taguchi, um, so I guess it was then once I started training in Fight Factory, because Fight Factory is quite renowned for that style. So it kind of suddenly became apparent to me that like, okay, while I'm training here, this is going to be like the predominant form of wrestling that we learn, and I just loved it. I was like, I could not get enough of the different techniques and the different, like the 5 to 10 different ways you can get out of wrist lock or a hammer lock. And it was really just transform. It was kind of a sudden like a realization, like wow, like I'm always been interested in wrestling, but like now that I'm doing this chain and I'm doing this style, it all just started to click. And I guess once you kind of get steeped in a particular area, and you just become to appreciate it more, and you're studying it more, and then you're kind of deploying what you've learned and what you've studied, and you're in the ring. It's really, really cool to go from watching something like a best of the Super Juniors clip, going to practice, going to training, practicing it endlessly, and then being able to pull it off in matches and make that your kind of distinguishing selling point. It's like this guy can do chain wrestling at a high
That's
level.
awesome.
So that whole journey has been really, really fulfilling, I would say.
Before we get out of here, is there anything you want to promote? And you got matches coming up, or you got anything across the seas lined up? I know you're only going to be here for like a week left.
I'm heading to Charlotte on Saturday to visit a good friend, and then from there I fly to Dublin, and then I land in Dublin on the Tuesday, and then on the Thursday I fly to France for a good friend's wedding. So the immediate future is less wrestling based, sadly, but I think in the next few weeks following that trip, I'll be lining some things up, and you'll be seeing some promotional material
Awesome.
in speaking to my upcoming matches.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Jack. I love
Yeah,
it, man.
my
It
pleasure.
was a
And
blast.
yeah, no, really, really delighted that you, from a conversation 9 months ago at Boulder Taco Fest, you have now come full circle and launched it. And I'm very excited for you and all the guests that are clearly lining up to be next in line.
Yeah, I'm appreciative of all the love I've received. I'm appreciative of you. Can't wait till you're back in Colorado, kicking some butt here at Primos,
Yeah.
CWC, CSW.
Yep.
But thank you for coming on, man.
Before
Yeah.
we go, speaking of CSW, just a funny thing came into my brain when from the last show when I was about to come out. I'm like, you have my music ready, right? You're like, oh, Butterfly, Crazy Town. I'm like, yeah, that's the one. It was just like a last minute,
I was scrambling at that show. Some of the music on the hard drive didn't work. So I was trying to like figure it out on the fly.
Yeah.
Thankfully I did, and I feel like I handled it pretty well.
Yeah, I
But
mean it's a thankless job. People just assume that all of that is lined up magically in advance, but it just dawned on me as I was about to go out. I just said, let's just make sure we have the right song. Um, but yeah, I mean the work you do across all the different promotions is really appreciated, and you are an unsung hero of Colorado wrestling, and very proud to see you thrive and succeed. And wish you all the very best with the podcast, my friend.
The feelings are likewise, Jack. I absolutely love you. The vibes, and that's something you hear a lot here in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
States. Vibes. But the vibes were right, man. When I met you, you were nice. You were humble. You were ready to help out with the ring, or if someone needed something, or it was very noticeable, and I appreciate that a ton, brother.
Likewise. And look, hopefully we can do this again soon when you probably got the next like 20 weeks booked up with interviews, so maybe I'll come back to you early next year.
Yeah, definitely. We'll definitely get back into it. I would love to have you back, especially, post injury, see where you've grown, see how far you've taken that chain wrestling.
Yes, absolutely. And best of luck with everything, and hopefully see you later in the summer.
Will do, man. I absolutely love you, Jack. You have a wonderful evening, brother.
You too. Take care.
Well, that's it. I'm Rocco McSweets. That's been the Sweet Spot featuring Jack Moody. What a wonderful dude he is, huh? Absolutely love him. Great story. Hopefully y'all can go check out some of his matches. Be sure to look up Jack Moody. Facebook, YouTube, anywhere you can. Instagram, Twitter. Not sure if they have all of those things, but I appreciate y'all for joining me on the inaugural Sweet Spot. I'll be back maybe I think tomorrow or Friday, or maybe Thursday. I have an interview lined up. I will see you guys then. Love you. Have a wonderful evening. I'm out.